October 24th, 1944, Philippine Sea, east of Leyte Gulf. The Combat Information Center is a dark aquarium of light. Green pips creep across the plotting scope, chalk squeaks, and the voice from the SK radar. Watch sounds steady in a way that makes your back go colder. Multiple bogeys. Angels 2 to 4 bearing 330, range 35. On the open bridge of a Fletcher class destroyer screening task group 38-3. J.G. Sam Corcoran wipes spray from his binoculars and feels the ship lift to the swell. The same beat as all morning, the same smell of hot cordite and salt, but the air has changed. Somewhere, up threat, a strike group of DeFoy, Jody, dive bombers and B-6 and Jill, torpedo planes is riding the wind out of Luzon. Fighter direction is sending Hellcats to cut the braid, but leaks always get through. Aft in Mount 51's twin 5-inch 38, the breech blocks run like sewing machine fists. Shell after shell clunks into the fuse setter, where a petty officer with thick wrists cranks the dial to a position that wasn't there 2 years ago. VT. No more trimming tens of seconds on a brass ring and praying the clockwork gods agree with your geometry. Variable time is what the paperwork says. Around the scuttlebutt they call it radio eyes. And they say it came from men in lab coats who looked at vacuum tubes and saw miracles. The Mark 37 director high above sloughs, noses in, and the Mk-112 and Mk-22 radars feed ranges and angles into the electromechanical brain of the one. A rangekeeper. Numbers roll, hand wheels spin, sound-powered phones hiss. Stand by, commence firing! The first salvo goes long. White bursts walking like lanterns across the gray. Then the solution tightens. Air bursts snap into existence around a shadow that wasn't there a heartbeat before. The Judy's wings scissor. The pilot flinches into a shallow skid. Then the sky around him becomes a ring of angry blossoms. No direct hit. No need. The fuse in each shell has been listening all the way in, counting distance with a tiny radio, hungry for a reflection. When it hears its own whisper bouncing off aluminum, it snaps the detonator and the 5-inch tears itself into a cloud that finds fabric and flesh the way a net finds fish. The Judy shudders, nose dips, and a string of black hash marks spills from under the cowling. Oil it slides under the horizon a mile off the destroyer's quarter, and the sea erases where it was. Good bursts. The gunnery officer barks down the tube, and you can hear the grin in the fire controlman's voices. Beyond the destroyer's sector, a Cleveland-class light cruiser throws a curtain wider than a ballroom with her 6 twin 5-inch mounts, each shell wearing the same invisible second sight. A Bofors 40 mm section on the destroyer's fantail chatters at another smear diving through the burst pattern, and the tracers look like rain climbing the wrong way. The pilot, young, determined mortal, tries to nurse the aircraft through the storm into the hard, low angles where 20 mm and 40 mm own the business. He does not get there. The next Vati shell lets go 5 yards off his starboard wing groot, and the aircraft becomes 3 complaints to gravity instead of 1. In the wardroom, the ship's captain keeps his mouth shut and watches the trace plot. He has read the orders. Do not fire over land. If you can help it, do not let the enemy fish one of these things from the surf, pull it apart, and name what they find. The same memo says the fuse is stable to spin. Shock. Cold. But treat it like a sleeping tiger anyway. The lab that brought this to sea, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, has given the Navy a box of weather with a trigger. You respect the weather. By noon, the task group is wrapped tight in its own bristling cocoon, Essex-class flight decks catching aircraft, slick with Philippine humidity. Destroyers and cruisers bow on to the threat. Ordnance crews sweating into their dungarees in a rhythm that looks like prayer from a distance. The first day of the battle for Lake Gulf is a bad day to be sloppy. That is, it is a normal day of war, and somewhere ashore, an air staff officer writing the sortie report underlines the words, "flak, unusually effective," and chalks it up to fighter cover and luck. On the destroyer's director, a fire controlman watches the blips thin and then disappear entirely. The Hellcats and the weather have done their share. The 5-inch mounts have done theirs. With a kind of merciless grace no gun ever had before, Corcoran lowers his glasses. The bridge talks in clipped murmurs. The ship slides back into the machine ballad of screening for carriers. And the new thing, the secret thing, is not said out loud. Its proof hangs in the clean horizon. That night the ship's radioman, tired and curious and 20, asks the gunnery officer if the stories are true, if the shell really knows an airplane from a cloud. The officer smiles with half his face and says, "Knows enough." He doesn't add the other piece. If the rumor is true, and nobody will say in ink, that the same fuse will one day tear infantry from hedgerows in Europe by bursting at man height, then what the Navy has at sea is not just a better clock. It is the first time a shell can change its mind in the air. In the morning the bogey calls will come again, as faithful as tide tables. The difference is that now the sky has teeth you can't see. October 25, 1944, Mablacat East Airfield, Luzon. The hangar is a cave of oil and echo. Lieutenant Yukio Seki, hand on the cowling of a Zero that will not need a landing checklist, listens while the staff captain talks through the arithmetic of death. The word talk has a clean, ceremonial taste in the mouth. The idea has an uglier one. The plan is simple: dive through the flak and the fighters, put steel and fuel into a flight deck, and call it even for everything burned on Rabal's runways and buried at Guadalcanal around the plywood table. A major says, "When they see you will not turn, their gunners falter." A captain counters, "Their fighters are many." No one mentions the rumor from the fleet. That American flak now bursts like a net flung by a god, always too close. At sea the rumor has earned a name. On escort carrier St. Lo, a young seaman looks up, sees a sun glint, and never finishes the word he started. The Zero drops like a blade, and the world becomes heat and screaming metal in the confusion, and the smoke, and the minutes that skip. Lo explodes from within. Aviation fuel, and bombs arguing with each other in the only language they share. No fuse, no cap, no geometry can stop every man who decides to be a bomb. The ocean takes the ship. The ocean keeps the secret. But elsewhere in Late's broad blue and later off Luzon's bays, other dives fail in ways men have not seen before. The gunnery officer on a Cleveland class cruiser feels the change at his fingertips, transmitted through the train and elevation handwheels like a heartbeat. The Mk-37 director calls numbers. The radar smells bearings. The rangekeeper chases the math, and the VT shells bloom not where they were told by a clock, but where the air tells them a body is. Air bursts in a perfect basket. One signalman murmurs, and he isn't wrong. Jodies and Zeros tear themselves to pieces 5, 10, 20 yards from a hull. The skin of the sky stitched with smoke puffs that look placed by a decorator with a grudge. On the Japanese side, the reports stack in a way that refuses neat conclusions. A staff report. Enemy anti-aircraft improved. A squadron leader. New radar fire control? A captain. Pilots lost nerve. A rear admiral runs his finger down the list and writes in the margin, weather. In the same folder, a pilot who lived drafts 3 lines that never leave his notebook. Shell bursts that follow you. The air struck me. December 1944, off Mindoro. The sea is calmer, but the stakes are not. A destroyer squadron covers the approach while escort carriers cycle planes to keep Army P-30As and transports flowing south. The kamikazes come in singles and pairs. Low and fast. A picket destroyer takes a hit and belches flame. 2 more go to flank speed and write white scars in the blue. On a nearby cruiser, the 5-inch mounts go to a autoload, and the command repeats like beads. VT, VT, VT. Radar keeps the solution. The shells keep their own counsel. A 0 lines up on the carrier's island. It never gets to test the last second of courage. A 5-inch shell listens, hears its own chirp come back from aluminum, throws its guts sideways into the cockpit. The aircraft becomes a smear of wings and dust. By the time winter turns to spring, the word kamikaze is inked in every sailor's head. Some try to make a joke of it. Most don't. On the fantail of a destroyer, a pair of sailors smoke without speaking and watch the wakes roll outward from a ship that is alive by inches. One of them says, "They thought they could scare us quiet." The other taps ash into the wind. "They did," he says, "for a minute." It is only then that you understand what the fuse has bought. A minute of time where there used to be none. And then the fleet turns north and then west toward an island whose name will become a synonym for being attacked forever. April 16, 1945, radar picket station No. 1 northwest of Okinawa. The destroyer rides a gray swell like a man rides his own heartbeat. Never quite in step, but alive. The ship's sky radar paints the horizon with ghosts, and the SPI height finder measures angels in feet that feel like bets. The air plot chalkboard under red lamps fills with kanji and arrows courtesy of voice traffic crackling from sick to bridge to gun director. Kikusui. They call these massed attacks. Floating chrysanthemum. And there is nothing floral about them. The sky keeps delivering metal and flame, and the destroyers on the picket line. Thin, alone, vital. Keep standing with their fists up. On the bridge, the captain's voice is a worn file. All hands, stand by air action. 5-inch to automatic VT fuse, Bofors and Oerlikons. Hold your water. The 5-inch 38 twins nose up with the measured confidence of men who have done this for months. Thimki 37 director tracks and the Wonkie computer in plot sings its electromechanical song, a line of zeros, and key 43, Oscars, materializes out of haze. Low and then high and then low again, testing the ring. The first salvo goes, then the second, and the sky ahead of the lead aircraft turns into a field of invisible tripwires. When he touches one, the wire becomes a wall. A 5-inch shell that cannot see has felt him with a whisper of radio, and has chosen the exact yard to come apart. Shards and shocks slap the wing. Fuel mists. The engine coughs. The aircraft slides left and meets the Pacific. The survivors jink lower, looking for the place where the long guns stop owning the air. That's where the Bofors bark comes in. Twin and quad 40 mm mounts pounding in a rhythm that lives in your teeth. The red tracers look like rules drawn in a schoolbook. The gray puffs of VT look like the teacher's hand. Oerlikons thrum when the shapes get too close, and the gunner can make out the pilot's scarf. The gun captain on Mount 53 has learned to feel the difference between a time fuse And the new thing, by the way, the air bursts, build a basket. Keep it out there, he says. Out where the proximity fuse does its best. Where the ships you're protecting exist in theory, not in fragments. Aft damage control teams walk around the ship with axes and desire waiting to run. The man at repair 2 carries a crash pump hose on one shoulder and a word he will not say out loud, Laffy. Ship that wouldn't die. Took hits and near, misses and still kept her flag flying, the story says. What the story mostly leaves out is the rings in the air where the VT bursts live, slowing everything down just enough that human beings with hoses and will had time to fight. The Japanese pilots are not fools. They are men with orders and courage and a spool of bad options. Lieutenant Nishi's Zero skims the wave tops, climbs in a shallow arc to meet the horizon of a carrier station beyond, then sees a picket he had not hoped to meet, a single gray stick with 4 funnels and a face like a jaw. He banks into the run. The destroyer's fights mounts rotate toward him with the inevitability of a happening. He watches the first flower open in the air to his left and thinks, not bad. The second opens 10 yards ahead, and he has just enough time to understand that someone has put mines in the sky. A mile away on the deck of a support destroyer, a chaplain stands by the starboard boat crane and prays without words. His hands are jammed into the pockets of his pea coat, and the wind plucks the end of his scarf. Around him the war plays in layers. VT bursts far out, Bofors mid-range. Ehrlichon close, a symphony conducted by a director whose baton is math. He wonders, briefly and blasphemously, if this is what mercy looks like. Something that gives your ship an extra 3 seconds to move, an extra 20 yards of room to breathe. Night puts a lid on the day's arithmetic without changing the sum. In sick, the air plot is erased and rewritten over and over. The fuse that began in a quiet lab in Maryland keeps doing its unshowy work at sea, and the men who rely on it keep the rules, police your duds. Don't let one wash ashore, never talk details in letters home. Call it VT, and let the other guy think you mean variable tide. If he asks, ashore in Tokyo. A staff officer frowns at the latest report from Kashu and writes, enemy fire increasingly effective, remedy training mass. He does not know there is no remedy on a page for a shell that listens for you. June 1945, the fleet's bruises are layered, a sex deck's patched, radars replaced. New cans slid into picket slots as others limp away. The raids still come. Many get through. Too many don't. Ask any man who stood on a tin can at Station 1 or 10 and watched the sky turn into a grinder. Was there a moment the flow broke? A point where skill and bravery and steel found one more alley? He'll point with his chin at the clean horizon and say, out there where the bursts are. Then he'll light a cigarette and talk about the next watch. The war ends the way wars end, not with an answer, but with an absence, when the files are opened and men in other countries read the reports. Some of them will make a small, bitter sound behind their teeth. Magic. One Japanese officer writes in his diary, years later, remembering the raids that never reached the angle they needed. Not magic. His American opposite number would answer, given the chance. Just a fuse that knew you were there,